Welcome back to Career Pathways. My name is Don Bowers, and welcome again to Conquering the Pi, Part 2, Headless Operation of the Raspberry Pi 3. And I want to make sure we understand this will also work with the Raspberry Pi 2 as long as the Raspberry Pi 2 has a wireless adapter. The Raspberry Pi 3 comes with one embedded. And I also want to mention this is for penetration testers. And if you've not watched Conquering the Pi Part 1, you might want to go ahead and watch that if you need to know how to configure the Pi up to this point. Again, this is a 4-part or more video series. So as we begin to look at going headless, what does it mean to go headless? Well, the goal for this particular portion of the video is to be able to take the Raspberry Pi, plug it into a network using the wired adapter, and plug the power in, but that's all. No HDMI cable plugged in, which is going to present us actually with a couple of problems, and I will demonstrate those in this video. I also would not know the IP address necessarily, so we need to configure this to actually send us an email with our internal IP address, and check this out. Also the external IP address, the one that actually is out on the internet. So they may be buried in somebody's network, 2 or 3 layers deep depending on the routing situation. The way we're going to configure this is going to give us the IP address that the Pi's internal network card is using. It's going to give us the external IP address of whatever we would see from the internet. That way, if you want to begin a penetration test on that particular IP address, you could. Remember, not all websites are located at a corporate office, for example, or on that particular part of the network. So this can be very handy. So in order to do that, we also want to install HostAPD for a wireless access point. So I want to be able to plug this Raspberry Pi into someone's network, be able to walk around the corner, bring up my tablet that has a copy of PuTTY or X11 VNC, such as something like, I don't know, VNC Viewer, Tight VNC, Tiny VNC, several VNCs out there, and be able to remote control the graphic interface of my Raspberry Pi so I can actually begin the penetration test. We're going to have to install and configure some network interfaces, set up a bridged adapter, and those kinds of things for this HostAPD to work. And of course, we also want to install and configure the X11 VNC and some bridging utilities. And I know I went kind of from the bottom up, but I really am just kind of trying to have a conversation and using this as a reminder of all the things I want to talk about. We also need to configure HDMI mode access. One of the things that will happen on the Raspberry Pi if you try to run headless without doing this last step is that the screen, if it does not, if the Raspberry Pi does not see an HDMI output or an HDMI video monitor plugged into it, it's going to revert back to a very small 7-inch type display that the Raspberry Pi is capable of. Well, we need to tell the video, and in fact the HDMI video, not to do that. We need to tell it that whether there's a HDMI video monitor plugged into this thing or not, that we needed to have a particular resolution, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So when we finish this particular section of video, we should be able to plug our Raspberry Pi in and have full headless operation mode with a wireless access point, with it sending us an email to give us our IP, both internal and external. So this is actually kind of an important video. This really sets us up for a real success with the Raspberry Pi. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started making this thing truly headless. Now remember where we left off last time in PuTTY. We had a terminal window up, and I'm going to go ahead and log in as root with the password of Tor. And here we are back in our terminal window, and everything is exactly the way we left it. So what I want to do now is I want to install 4 or so different applications because we're going to need them all when we begin this process of making this truly headless. The first one I want to actually install is called HostAPD. So I'm going to do an apt get install HostAPD, and see if I did that right. I see what I did wrong. apt get install HostAPD. And it's going to go out and get that particular application. Now, the truth has it, I can actually put all of these applications or all of these programs on one big line if I wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and install them one by one just so we get any kind of interaction between us and the terminal completed and understood as well. So HostAPD is going to be the first application we install. And these will take a few minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and let the video run while we install them. There's the first one. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen by typing in clear. And again, I'm going to do a HostAPD install. And this one's going to be one called Bridge, BRIDGE dash utils, UTILS. So these are the bridging utilities that we're going to need to actually create this bridge network between the wireless and the wired in order to create the access point using HostAPD. The plot thickens, right? And of course, these are all found in the Kali Linux repository, so they make it very easy to find and install. Okay, that one's done. See, it's kind of painless, right? Okay, we'll do another one, and this one is called SendMail. Backspace, type in send mail. This, of course, is a program that's going to allow us to email ourselves the IP address, both of the internal network adapter and the external IP address facing the internet. Very handy, I must say. Now, SendMail install is actually a little bit interesting because I believe this is the one that comes up and actually does quite a bit of really cool stuff like compiling all kinds of different stuff, and it's actually a pretty cool install. I love watching installs like this just because it's cool. So this one takes a few minutes. This is the entire, basically, program to send email from a Kali Linux box and specifically a Raspberry Pi, although we'll do it from other OSs as well. So this is actually working on some cool stuff behind the scenes. Now, when this comes out, there actually might be a couple of errors pop up on the screen as you kind of watch this go by, if you can read that fast. These aren't going to cause us any problems, so don't worry about them. They're not going to impact what we're doing, and hopefully everything is going to work out just fine. Okay, that one's done. And then last but not least, we want to install one called X11 VNC. And this is the program that will allow us to remote control this using a graphic user interface. Very cool. Now, as we install these, the first thing we're going to do in step 2 is actually configure X11 VNC. And if you'll remember in the last video at the very end, I showed you www.pentestprime.com, and I showed you where you could get a copy of all of the cutting and pasting that I do inside things like Nano and stuff. Here's where this is going to come in really handy. We could go over to the Raspberry Pi graphic interface and do a search and a sessions and actually find X11 VNC and install it that way. The problem with that is if we were to do that, it would put a special file in .config auto start that would have some parameters. The problem is those particular parameters don't work. So whenever I'm working with the Raspberry Pi, I really like to keep a copy of PuTTY handy, because when you're having to cut and paste scripts, and we're going to do a lot of that this time around in this particular lesson, when you have to go ahead and cut and paste scripts, Nano does it very well, and you can do it directly into the terminal window from your desktop PC, and it just makes things go a lot quicker and a lot smoother. And that's why I like using PuTTY and the Nano. I don't need to access everything graphically with the Pi yet. In fact, I can't yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run clear, and I want to configure X11 VNC. And to do that, it's actually very easy. We just simply want to type in X11 VNC, and the first time you run this, what you want to do is you want to do a dash store PASSWD, store password. And what this is going to do is going to generate the login password used for remoting into this particular device. Now I'm not going to use Tor, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the return key. And this is, okay, what password are you going to use? And I'm going to type in a particular password. And you'll notice as I do that, there's no activity. Well, it is taking the keystrokes. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to ask me to re-enter it. And I'm going to press enter again, and it says, okay, they agree. Now, do you want to go ahead and store the password? And if you tell it no, it'll ask you to re-enter. I'm going to tell it yes. So now, X11 VNC has now stored the password. That's the first thing we need to do. The second thing we need to do is build the auto start config file. And I'm going to show you how to do this manually because it's actually kind of cool. We are in not the root of the system, but the home of the user root. And I explained that in the last video. The home of the root of the system has directories like etc and var and usr and those kinds of things. This is actually the user called root, and it is his home directory. Because in Kali, we're penetration testers, we like to run as root because we have full control of everything. So to get to where we need to go, you'll notice there is no config directory, but really there is, and it's hidden. So if I do a cd space dot config, guess what the dot is? The dot says hide the directory. Well, by typing in cd space dot config, we're not really unhiding the directory, but we make it available. So I'm going to do an ls again, and here is the stuff you'll find in that config directory. Now the problem is that we need another folder called auto start, and that does not exist. So I'm going to type in mkdir AUTOSTART, and now we have a directory called auto start, which we need. So I'll type in cd space auto start, and there I am. Now I need to create a special file, and I'm going to go ahead. There's two ways we can create a file in Linux. Well, there's more than two, but one way is just type in the word nano, which is our word or our document editor or our text editor, and then type in the name of the file. The other way that we can do it is using a command called touch. If I typed in touch X11 VNC .desktop, it would create a file called X11 VNC.desktop. Now I'm not going to do it that way. I am going to do it using nano, and that's typically how I do it. If I want to create a file, typically it's because I actually want to edit the file. So I'm going to go ahead and type in nano X11 VNC.desktop. I'm going to look at it real carefully, make sure I spelled everything correctly, and I'm going to go ahead and press enter, and that's going to give me, oops, what did I do wrong? NANO, X11, I spelled nano incorrectly. And there it is. Now, I'm going to go over to the text file that you should have downloaded from www.pentestprime.com, and I'm going to take some code and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it right in here to nano. And if you did not download the document, you are certainly welcome to handwrite this stuff. It's not a big deal. So you're going to want it looks like I missed the beginning bracket. So let me it's easier sometimes just to do it again because I really don't want to miss the bracket and I don't want to type in the wrong bracket. So let me cut and paste this again. Sometimes I find in these editors it's easier to go from the bottom to the top than the top to the bottom because I'll typically miss those brackets sometimes, and that's never a good thing. There you go. So if you want to pause this video and take a piece of paper or a document editor and write this, that's fine. You'll need to make sure you do this exactly like it is here. So you want the brackets, you want desktop dot entry, and that does need to be a capital D on desktop. So remember, in Linux, everything is case sensitive. I know this file is going to work, so I'm going to go ahead and press the Control O, which tells Nano to output the file or write the file, and I'm going to do a Control X. And there I am. Now if I do an ls, we'll see there is indeed a file called X11 VNC.desktop. So that should work. Okay, so that's done and that's configured. And if we wanted to, we could in fact now remote into this using our graphic user interface. But I want to do a couple other things before we play around with this, because one of the things I want to do is, just in order to demo this process, is I'm going to want to log in with the full graphic interface. Then I'm going to actually take and unplug the HDMI cable and show you what that looks like if you don't do the last step that we're going to do. So that's all okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to just go ahead and back out of this directory. So cd space dot dot and cd space dot dot. And here we are back at root. And I need to actually modify an interfaces file. And this is actually pretty simple. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to type in cd dot dot, cd etc, etc, cd network, there it is. And in the network folder, there is a file called interface. I'm going to interface says, I'm going to go ahead and type in nano interfaces. And I press the tab key, and there I have the file. Now there's only 4 lines in this file, and what I really want to do is just take those out. I find it easier just to do that. Just go ahead and take them all out, and what I'm going to want to do is replace them with a bunch of code of my own. And right now I am actually copying that code right now, and I've now copied it, and I'm going to go ahead and copy. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to delete this code. I could, try to, insert my code into this and modify a bunch of stuff. It's easier to start over because this has everything I want. So here's the code I've now entered. This says, and I've kind of rimmed out and made a couple of comments, interface settings for the bridged interface. So this is going to take, and it's going to do an auto bridge, so it's going to automatically bring up an interface called BRO for bridge, or BR0. It's going to set the loopback address. It's going to set up an interface called WLAN 0 and set it up appropriately. And then it's going to set up ETH01 as hot pluggable. It just does a lot of cool things. So this is what's going to allow our Ethernet 0, which is what our IP address is on right now, to actually be ported over to the bridge, the BR0 interface, and be able to make our wireless adapter be able to talk to all that. So that's all we need. You can go ahead and do further research on this code. Trust me when I tell you, it's going to work. So I'm going to do a Control O, Enter, and Control X. So now our interfaces file is now ready to go. Then I need to configure HostAPD. HostAPD is the part of the program that's going to allow us to do wireless network access point. Now, here's the thing. When the Raspberry Pi 3 came out, one of the things we do with wireless networks a lot of the times is we will do things like set up a fake AP that people can log into, and we can actually go in and look at the traffic and strip off the SSL or the TLS and look at their passwords and all the kind of fun stuff that ethical hackers and penetration testers do. In order for those types of functions to work, they have to be able to go into what we call promiscuous mode. The problem with going into promiscuous and or monitor mode is not all adapters will do that. This adapter that came with the Raspberry Pi 3, that was one of my frustrations, is that that does not go into promiscuous or monitoring mode. So it makes it kind of hard to do the things I was hoping to do with the wireless adapter. However, what it will do is connect to a wireless network, and it can also become its own access point. Now, you can't use programs like AirMoniNG because that requires monitor mode, and this does not support that. So if you go out and do a little bit of looking, you'll find there's another suite of programs. One is called HostAPD that will allow your network interface that cannot go into monitoring mode to actually become its own access point. It's very cool. So what do I want to do? Well, first of all, I need to configure the HostAPD file to actually talk to HostAPD where HostAPD actually resides. So to do that, I simply need to go to a different location. So I'm going to do a cd space or cd dot dot. This is going to take me back into the folder of Etsy, and then I'm going to type in cd space default, hit enter, and you'll see I have a file called HostAPD. I'm going to go ahead and load that file called HostAPD in Nano. And what you'll see is, and in fact I've already done this, right down here there should be a line that says, has this information in it right here. And I have that in my documentation. Now the reason this is here is I just tried this a couple minutes ago and everything did not work and kind of fell apart, so I had to reset the video. So again, nothing up my sleeve. And what had happened is I'd put a second quote right here, and while that didn't cause any of the systems to error, it did cause everything not to work, and I had to actually go back out and troubleshoot. So I backed the video up. So the only thing I've changed that would normally be default is this would say daemon conf and then have two quotes, and what happened is one of the quotes got left in and I just visually didn't catch it. So you want to be really careful of having double quotes, because double quotes will break things, but it may not always be apparent what you broke. Okay, so this is the command that needs to go in there. Daemon underscore conf equals quote /Etsy /HostAPD /HostAPD.conf quote. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do a control O, and again, and that's probably what happens when I do the control O, but control O and control X. Now this command that I just showed you is in fact in the video or in the command set that I've given you. And it's going to say again, daemon underscore conf equals quote quote. You simply need to replace that line with the one I just showed you. And the next thing then you want to do is you want to go into the actual folder called HostAPD underneath Etsy. So we'll type in cd space dot dot, and we'll type in cd host APD. And you can see there's one file there that's called up or IP up down. We don't need to worry about that. We want to create a brand new config file called HostAPD conf. So I'm going to go ahead and type in nano HostAPD.conf. Hit enter, and I'm going to cut and paste the following code. Now this is actually a little longer, and that's okay. We'll take a look and see what this actually has to offer us. I'm going to copy this in. I'm simply going to paste it, and there it is. So what is this file all about? Well, first of all, it gives the interface to WLAN 01. It says we're also going to use bridge, and it's called bridge equals BR0. Remember, we set both of these in our interfaces file. Device equals, and this is the device driver for the internal network interface for the Raspberry Pi 3. Country equals US. SID equals mypi underscore AP25, and the reason I put the AP25 in there was because I want to make sure everybody knows this is an access point. And my workstation is workstation 25, so if you're following this along with me in the lab environment, then you'll want to put your lab number here instead of 25. We don't want two of these mypi AP25, and you can really name this SSID anything you want. I also give it. I also tell it to use the G network and use channel 6, use WPA2. The passphrase does need to be a long passphrase. If it's too short, it won't work. So I put a fairly long one in there, and this is just kind of a standard one that everybody sees and knows and loves. Put your own in there, make sure it's complex, because this is going to be basically for device management, and you want to make sure you're the only one that has access to this, okay? And then of course the WPA key management is going to be PSK, the WPA pairwise is TKIP, and of course we're using COMP, and then a couple other parameters. So that's all we need. The only thing you would probably ever need to change in this particular file is the passphrase and what you want to call your AP. It really is that simple. So we're going to go ahead and do a Control O. Whoops, my cursor was not in the field of the terminal software, so it gave me that message on the screen. I apologize. So now that we've done that, we have all that working. Next, what we need to do is we need to actually check and see if the service is started. So I'm going to type in service space dot tick tick status tick all or dash, and this is going to bring up my services, and you should see that HPD in fact has, or HostAPD has not started. So I'm going to simply try to start it. And as always, I like to do an enable first. So system, CTL, enable, host, APD. And I'm also going to do a start. And it says, and this is, oops, my bad, take that out. And it says it did start. Now, if for some reason this doesn't start, one of your other options is to go to another location called initd, and I want to show you that. Now, mine started, and everything actually should work. And in fact, I will be able to go over to my regular computer and see if this started. If it doesn't, let me show you where you may need to actually start this. If we go into etc cd ... and we go into another folder called initd, so I'm going to do a cd space init .d, and you'll see that there is another HostAPD file. I'm going to type in nano HostAPD. Whoops, wrong one. Let me back up on that. Let me make sure I'm in the right spot. Initd, and there should be, there it is. So nano HostAPD. And this is the HostAPD. This is the actual service that runs. This is actually, there's quite a bit here. Sometimes if you can't get the service to run, you can't get your HostAPD to work, you have to actually go into this folder and run it from here. Now, we didn't have to do that this time, but I just want to make you aware of where that was, just in case you ever needed to use it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video because I want to make sure that this is actually up and running and make sure that I have an actual access wireless point. So I'll be back in a few minutes and we will continue this process. In fact, let me go ahead and clear my screen. There we go. So just to prove my point, I had to go and find a wireless adapter for my desktop PC because the one I had all of a sudden quit running. So I ran out and grabbed my wireless from across the room. I plugged it into my desktop, and check this out. I'm going to go under here underneath my wireless connectors and check what I have here. Here's one called HostAPD underscore, or MiFi, excuse me, underscore AP 25. So this wireless adapter on my Raspberry Pi is actually working. Didn't have to reboot, didn't have to do anything. As soon as I started that service, automatically came up and ran. That is very cool. And folks, really, we're almost done. We just need to do a couple more things here to get this to work. Now, since I'm already in this mode, I think that my VNC should also work, and I want to show you that first so you know what it should look like, and then we're going to go ahead and disconnect it from the HDMI cable back there on my Pi, and I'll show you later on what it does look like, and then I'll fix it. But here's what it really should look like. I'm going to go ahead and go into tight VNC, and I should be coming in on address 119. And if I tell it to connect, hopefully this is going to connect, and looks like it will. If something's wrong and this isn't going to connect, remember we already configured X11 VNC. I'm going to go ahead and type in my password, and this is what we really should get. This is, in fact, the Raspberry Pi. This is a default screen I use. We'll change that later, but this is a default screen I used, and this is my actual Pi. And it's up and running, and it's good to go, right? Well, when we disconnect the HDMI cable, then, of course, it's not going to look like this anymore. It's going to look kind of funky and really small, and we'll do that in a few minutes. But I want to do one more step first. I want to actually create the portion of SendMail that's going to actually send me an IP or an email of my IP address. So let me show you that next, and then we'll do the last step, which is to make this so it will go back into monitoring mode at a screen the appropriate size like this one is. So I'll be right back. I just kind of wanted to show you that to kind of whet your appetite, so when we get into the last step, you understand why we're doing that. So this is working fine. But as soon as I unplug the HDMI cable, it's going to break it. So let's go ahead and get SendMail configured, and then we'll come back to this and we'll fix this little problem that we're going to create here as well. So I will be right back in just a moment. In order to check my wireless access point and make sure it's working, I had to get out of my terminal package. Well, I didn't have to, but I did. So I need to log back in real quick. So let me go ahead and log in. And there I am back in my terminal package. And in fact, I'm actually at the root user's home folder. Now, what I want to do next is I need to install my CheckIP. I want to install the Python script that's going to merge with SendMail and allow SendMail to send me my IP address. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new file. And this is actually going to be a Python script. So I'm going to type in nano. I'm going to call this Python script CheckIP.py, and you can call it anything you want as long as it ends in .py. I call mine CheckIP because that's exactly what I'm doing, is checking and sending the IP address via email. I'm going to press enter. Then I'm going to cut and paste the code that I gave you from my website, and there's the code. Now, I'm going to go all the way to the top of the screen because I want to make sure there are no spaces up here. If you cut and pasted this code in and there are spaces, that's going to be problematic for you. I know this because it happened to me, and I spent a couple days chasing my tail trying to figure out what in the world might be going on because I didn't know. And what happens is when if you start this file using ./CheckIP.py, it's going to look at the header to see what kind of file it actually is, and if it sees a blank there, it does not know it's a Python script, and it will just not do anything, which is really going to frustrate you, right? So make sure there's not a space at the very top of this file. If there were a space here, if you had a space in here, you can actually type the command Python space check ip.py, and it would indeed work, and I've tried it both ways. But the best way to do it is don't put a space at the top of your batch file. Now, there's a couple things we need to take a look at. The two, I went ahead and put in my school's IP address. The Gmail user, I put in, I want to use Gmail for this, so we're going to bounce off of a Gmail account, and I want to put Gmail in here because SendMail is already set up to use Gmail. It's really very simple. So if you don't have a Gmail account, you might want to go ahead and create one. And then, of course, I put in my password. These are the only three parameters you have to change. An account to send to, I'm using my CWI email account, the account at Gmail, and the account password to log into. Everything else, you guys, can just stay set. It's already set up for Gmail. That's how hard this was. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. So I'm going to do a Control-O, Enter, and Control-X. Then I need to make this script executable. Okay, so there we can see in my script is checkip.py. I'm going to type in chmod plus x and then ch CheckIP.py, and I have now made that a file that can be read. It needs to be able to be executed, and if I can't execute it, then I can't very well actually run the script. So that is extremely important that we do that. Now, in a little bit, we're actually going to, well, I'll tell you what we can do is we can actually run this file, and I can take a look and see if I indeed get an email on my email account. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in /check ip.py, and if it's everything's correct, whoops, my fault, py, it should actually go out and hesitate for a second or two and then come back with a prompt. And I will bet you if I check my phone, because trust me, this does not take long to go through, if I check my phone, I bet I've already got the I do. There you hear my phone tweaking, and it now says local IP address of 10.1.0.119. External email address is 97.121.45.28. How cool is that, right? That is so cool. So it just emailed me, even though, of course, now we know the file works. The trick is going to be to get it to actually boot. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video now that we got this working, because we have to do just the last thing, the last step. And I want to show you what the impact is if we don't do the last step. Then I'm going to do the last step and show you what the result's going to be of actually running this thing in a totally headless manner. Okay, so let me go ahead and clear my screen. And I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to go back to my Raspberry Pi. I'm going to unplug the HDMI video, and I'm going to actually reboot this thing. Okay, and I'm going to give it about a minute or two to reboot, and then I'm going to go ahead and log in using VNC, because I want to show you what that screen actually looks like and why we're going to do this next step, because it is a very important step. Okay, so I rebooted my Raspberry Pi, and what I did is I right-clicked on my terminal window for PuTTY, and I went back down and told it to restart the session, and I'm getting a login. That's the only way I know that this thing has indeed rebooted. And so here's what I wanted to show you. If I go back into tight VNC and I go ahead and tell it to connect, it's going to ask me for my password, which is like it should do, right? But here's what's going to happen. There's my screen. Guys, I don't know about you, I can't work like this. I'll never work like this again. This is way too small for anything. Well, that's because since the Raspberry Pi did not sense an HDMI connection to itself and be able to read the monitor that was on the screen, so it's not outputting HDMI because it sees no monitor connected, it's going to think that you have the small 7-inch screen that you can buy for the Raspberry Pi hooked in, so you can actually run it that way. Well, this is not going to work for me. So what we need to do next, and this is really the second to the last step. The last step is to automate. I need to automate the CheckIP, and I need to automate a couple other little things. Actually, CheckIP is really the main one I need to do. I need to automate that process because HostAPD is already running in the background. In fact, I should have gotten a second email now that I just rebooted, and I'm going to go check that just for fun. I should have already gotten an email. Oh, actually, I guess did I automate that? I did not automate CheckIP. I tested it, but have not automated it. So I need to automate CheckIP. That's the last thing I need to do. Once I get this running in the right graphic mode, because I'm going to actually use this right here to automate that process, this search feature, and I'll show you how to do that. But I can't work in a screen this size. So let me go ahead and close this. I'm going to stop the video, really just going to pause the video. I'm going to, actually I guess I need to stop it because I've got to reset my screen res for this screen here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. I'm going to go back and plug in my Pi and reboot. And then we're going to go in and actually change the mode. So this no longer looks for an HDMI connection, but has a preset mode. So I'll always get the a bigger screen. And then I can also show you in tight VNC how you can scale that and adjust it to your liking. But this does not scale. If I try to scale this, it's always going to be this size. And guys, this is not okay. So let me go ahead and close this down. I'm going to pause the video and I'll be back momentarily. Okay, so I've got my Raspberry Pi booted back up, and I can turn around and see it is actually back up and running full screen, all that kind of cool stuff. Now, watch this. I'm going to go ahead and right-click and reset my terminal session. Reset session. It's going to ask me for my username is root, password's Tor, and here we are back in PuTTY. Now, I want to run a special command. We've already looked at ls. I'm going to show you another command called lsblk. And what this does is this shows me the entire directory of my system, and it even shows me things like root. Now, this kind of looks funny. If I were in graphical mode, you see the little funny characters over here, you would see these as lines. So we can kind of ignore those. And what I want to do is I want to boot into this partition right here. Okay, I want to actually boot this partition. So I'm going to type in a command, and here's what the command looks like. And I'm going to mark it as boot so it knows that this is in fact the boot partition. There's the command. I want to say mount space dev space and then this name right here, and it just is this name here without the gobbledygook there, and we can look at the gobbledygook later, but this is just a couple of lines down here so you can kind of see a map. That's all we need to do, and we're going to actually call this boot, and I'm going to press enter. And now if I do an lsblk again, you see now that's actually marked as boot. And in fact, if I do a cd ... which puts me back in the root of the system, and I do a cd space boot, you'll now see a whole bunch of files here that you would not have seen before. In fact, had I gone into this earlier, you would have seen no files at all. All right. Now, I want to create a brand new file called config.txt. So I'm simply going to type in nano space config.txt. And in this file, I'm going to cut and paste about 6 lines of code. Well, really only 3 lines of code, but I have some remark statements in there as well. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'm going to copy this code in. So what this is going to do is this is going to set my HDMI, and it's going to force this to be hot pluggable. Basically, it's going to ignore the fact that there's not an HDMI cable plugged into the HDMI port, and it needs to use group 2, and I like to use mode 23. There is actually a full list of modes out there on the internet, and you can find these. If your monitor supports 60 hertz, then you don't want to try to run a 120 or something weird. So you've only got certain modes you can use. This one is mode 23. The other popular one is probably going to be mode 16. I find 16 a little bit more cumbersome than I do 23. So I'm going to use 23. And all we need to do now is save this file. So let me get back into where I need to be here, and I will save it. And I'm going to go ahead and do an ls, and you should now see a file called config.txt. Now I can go ahead and just reboot this, or I can unmount this. If I go reboot this, it will unmount it automatically. So let me just type in reboot. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video simply because I want to go unplug my HDMI cable now, and I want to go back and make sure that this is going to come up in the mode that I think it's supposed to. So let me go ahead and reboot, and I'll come back after the reboot, and we're actually going to open this up with VNC. So let me go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be back in just a moment. So here we are back, full desktop, full screen, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my VNC program. And by the way, I want to show you underneath the options, we actually do have the ability to scale, and right now I'm scaling at about 75% because I want it to all fit on the screen like I want it to. And you can change this number, and now if you change this number, your your Raspberry Pi will respond to these changes very positively, whereas before it would not. So I'm going to close this section. I'm going to go ahead and connect. And it's asking me for the handy dandy password. And what you're actually going to see, now you see this scaled down. You see it's not near as big as it was before. Okay, so whereas before this would not have responded to scaling, it was real small. The scaling would be bigger, but the picture would still be real small. I can now scale this. So let me just drop out of here real quick because I want it to fill more of my screen than that. So if I go over here and I go to options and I tell us go ahead and scale it 100%. Okay, and I go back in and I tell it to connect and I type in my password. See, now you have a lot better scaling. And in fact, we're actually going to run this in this mode from here on out. How cool is that? That is very cool, just so you know. Okay, so we only have one more task to do is we need to automate this CheckIP process so that every time this thing boots, it's going to go out and run that Python script called CheckIP. Well, how do we do that? Very simple. I'm going to go down here to the search, and I'm going to go up here to the search bar and type in session. And you can see that I have session and startup right here. I simply double click on that. And what's cool here is I can now look at this and I can see what programs are automatically running. In fact, let's do that. Remember we did this X11 VNC? Here it is right here. Because we put in that default, that X11 VNC.desktop, it's automatically running. And again, I could have done it through this program, but had I done that, then we would not have all of the parameters correct. So we have that actually running. Here is my SSH. Remember we did this SH key thing a while ago? There's SSH actually up and running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, and I'm going to call this CheckIP. How about email? No, how about CheckIP? Because that's the name of the program. Space IP. And I'm going to type in description. Send me the IP. And then the actual command, and we can do this one of two ways. I can type in period / and check ip.py, or I can simply type in, instead of this period / I could have actually typed in the word Python space and then check ip.py. I'm going to tell it OK. And what will happen if this is successful is it will put this at the very bottom of my list. There it says check IP, send me my IP address. And you can go in and you can edit this and modify it and do whatever you want with it. So now this is automatically booting as well. Very cool. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reboot this system because I want to double check that before we go to video or part 3. I want to make sure everything is working. We've already verified that our mode command is working. And by the way, you should notice that this screen is the icons are actually bigger than the one I posted before the real small one. That took more of the screen. I actually like working in this environment better because I can see it better. So I think it's kind of cool. I really like it. So, and by the way, we'll be changing the wallpaper from this to something else later because I don't like this particular wallpaper. So let me go ahead and go into terminal mode and do a reboot. And it's going to shut this particular session down, and I'm going to go ahead and reboot it. As this comes up, and I can always check by just clicking here because it's not going to come back up. It's not going to allow me to log in until it actually comes back up. So you can see nothing happened there except for an error message. So if I'm just patient, and because it's not having to push video out, it actually boots up a little bit quicker. So if that's any consolation, that's kind of cool. So I'll just test this a couple times. See, it's already up. How cool is that, right? Very cool. And I'm going to check my email and make sure that it actually got my email address or my email. I do see one there. I see this came in at 9:41. Let me check and see what my time is. Sometimes it takes a minute or two to come in, and it's 10:05 my time, so this email has not quite come in yet. But if I'm just patient, it will come in. And in fact, what I can do is I can actually check to see if it is now auto running. So if I do this again, click on the search and type in session, double click it. You're going to see this is no longer at the bottom. It should actually be in alphabetic order, and we can see the CheckIP, cinema IP address is actually running. So it may take a minute before I just executed the script and it ran. This may take a minute for it to come up and actually run, but that's okay. And the other one more thing I want to check is I want to go here to my wireless connections, and I want to make sure I still have my host pad, my access point right here. That's still working. So everything is absolutely perfect. So that's going to set us up for part 3. And in part 3, I want to install just a bunch of other applications that I think are important for the average penetration tester to actually have up and running on their Raspberry Pi. Everything from, I don't know, things like LibreOffice to gedit to a program called Guake, which I think you'll find absolutely fascinating. We're going to go ahead and install those programs in the next video, and we're actually going to do it from this interface rather than the small terminal program we were using called PuTTY before. We will now do everything from the GUI. Okay? So thanks for listening to part 2. I hope this has been as much fun for you as it has been for me. I absolutely love doing this kind of stuff. So I will bring you guys part 3 in a few moments.